Welcome back to the GallowgateShots YouTube channel. My name is Matthew, and thank you for being here for another episode of Beyond the Lines. It's the show where we get an opposition supporter's view when it comes to previewing Newcastle's next game, and the new season is finally upon us. And to help me preview Newcastle's game on Saturday against Aston Villa, I am joined by a very, very, very special guest. He's a stand-up comedian whose special Football Manager Ruined My Life can be found on YouTube. You'll also find him creating content for the FM Show podcast. He is an absolute FM addict, but most importantly for this podcast, he's a follower of Aston Villa. So will you please welcome the beautiful, the brilliant, it's Tony Jameson, ladies and gentlemen. How are you doing?
Mate, that's quite an intro, man. There was a lot of berries there, which was like, I was sort of going very, very, very. This is like a sort of delusions of grandeur at this point. Like we want to peg this down a little bit. Like what we've got is someone who's available. That's what you want to be looking for.
Well, I'm sure you're much more special than that, Tony. But I mean,
very kind.
We'll get to Villa and we'll get the Newcastle versus Villa at the weekend, but can't have yourself on without talking about the what's the best way to describe it? But Football Manager is just an enigmatic force in itself. It's took hold of many of us on your set, and I implore people to seek out Tony's special Football Manager Ruined My Life. It's actually filmed at the Stand in Newcastle as well. There's a bit in that where you say that you ask the crowd, like, how long have you been playing this? How long have you been? And one gentleman said, I'm 5 years clean. Yeah. I myself are 3 years clean. I fell in love with Crew Alexander during those difficult lockdown, well, say months, nearly a year, and turned that place around, made it my own. Never won the title, but I did win the Champions League. And for me, it's just, I don't think I'll ever better that, and I'll never go back to it. Are you still as addicted to Football Manager now as you ever were?
I'd probably say more so, to be honest. So it's really interesting. So obviously, we did the show. So the show itself, like the first incarnation of the show is 10 years old now. Like, so we are we were discussing just before we start hitting record, like, you know, is there more plans for anything? Like, we are potentially looking like at a sort of 10-year anniversary special. So we might do something like next year or the year after, which I know will be slightly past the 10 years, but that was all built around like this Blythe Spartan save where I did the whole thing. I went from like sort of what was Blue Square North at the time up to winning the Champions League and the Premier League and all that sort of stuff. And that was amazing, right? But then the game's got really difficult since then. So my achievement levels have gone down and down and down and down and down. And then I was like, sort of, maybe I like, you know, talking about the show and talking about Football Manager, and like feeling like I was being typecast as a comic. So I was trying to sort of like step away from it a little bit. Then, I mean, you mentioned, you know, the pandemic, like that happened, and I just had like my first kid was like a year old at that point. The second one was literally just born, as like a few months old at that point. And then like
good youth production.
Mate, I'm trying my best, man. I really am. Like, I'm not going to say wonder kids just yet, right? But I'm going to say like there's definitely some players in the youth academy right there, right? and like I got in touch with a mate of mine who's he was sort of a presenter, and he was like, "So look, you know, we need to do something like during the pandemic," and like so we started talking about doing a podcast, and because he was coming back into playing the game as well, and obviously SI then just gave it away for free for everyone because like, you know, we've all got nothing to do, we might as well try and do something. And I just fell back in, man. I went like deep in it as well. I wasn't even just like, because I'd never go back to Blythe because like I've already done that. So I ended up in Indonesia. That's like how deep I went in. I was just like, what's like Blythe? Indonesia, a bit. So, a bit, yeah.
Well, there's a tiny bit different.
I was under the green kit, so that's probably about the same that I've got, right? So I went in there and like I'm sort of going, I'm back in, I'm proper back in. And then like we sort of kept going and kept going. Then we started like, so the podcast grew, and then we sort of like came onto a new podcast and came onto the FM show. And then I started streaming on Twitch, and knowing there was just loads of people out there looking for that sort of stuff. And it was kind of like a nice escapism from how football is now. Again, we mentioned briefly before starting, like we feel as though football's on this kind of like this sort of this knife edge now. If it could go loads of different ways, but I think the FM is kind of like, it's almost like a sort of an indication of what football could be, I suppose, really. Yeah. Like it's, you know, because it's a different universe entirely. So yeah. The long answer is yes, very much. I'm still part of it, and can't really see an end at this point now.
So, is there any? I mean, I mentioned Crew Alexander for me. I literally will look out for their scores now. Even like I say, not playing for 3 years. Most of that team's been dismantled now. A lot of them play for Cardiff City. A lot of them have been dotted about. They've cashed in on their assets like Perry and G and Ryan Wintle and all those lads. Good to see them doing well though. But is there any other teams that you've became strangely affectionate for, or you look out for purely because of experiences through Football Manager?
Well, when we started streaming the current save with FM23, so what I'm doing at this point is I'm doing what's called a British Steel Challenge. So the idea is to win everything in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So that's all the divisions, all the cups. Like promotions count as a trophy, thankfully. Like so, you've got like your Vanarama North and South. So you could win the North and then have to go back to the South. The Welsh Division 1 and 2. And like Northern Ireland, and we started off at Banbridge in Northern Ireland, and their manager, they had no manager in real life at the time. Unfortunately, the manager they had in real life had actually died just before the game came out. So the game was hard coded for there to be a vacancy. We got the job, right? And we started streaming with Banbridge, and we started getting the Banbridge players coming in the stream because they're like, who on earth would pick Banbridge out of choice? It's like 3rd division of Northern Irish football. So there's me and a few of the Banbridge lads having a great time in the chat. We signed a player from another club. He was on the bench. You mentioned Crew United, I think they're called.
Yeah, the other one.
The other Crew. I had this lad on the bench. He's in the chat going, how are you, Gaffer starters? Come on. I'm just like, I would love to, but you haven't been able to hit a barn door for months. Right?
Yeah. Gotta be brutal. Gotta be brutal. How's it going now? Have you progressed at all? Like
we've got, so there's 35 trophies to win, or 35 sort of like leagues and cups to win. We've done 16 so far, so we're 20 seasons in. So that's not too bad. Like, you know, just shy of one a year. Helped a lot by a quadruple at Celtic, which really sort of helped bump it up, and then treble at TNS in Wales. But yeah, we're currently Leeds at the minute, back in the Premier League, which feels a bit weird because we've gone through everything. So we're now into the sort of the part of the universe where all the players are now new gens and no one's really real anymore. So this is where the fun bit happens, right?
Yeah, it's always, you always want to get to that point, because I feel like when you finally find, because you get an affection for, and again, to reference especially, you talk about these players are amazing in the game and didn't go on to be too great, but you have that affection for them. I mean, I'm not going to badmouth this player because he did end up going on to be okay, but like Oscar Cardozo was always mine. Like he was the Paraguayan, like 6'4" forward. But like when you start getting regens, you just build up their own backstory. You love them to bits, and you can be betrayed by them. You can have them till the last. It was amazing. Have you ever had that affinity with a regen?
Oh, so many. Like I've got a son in my current game. Like I've genuinely got a son.
That's the dream. That's
the first time that's ever happened in like all the years of playing. And we just did it by chance. I was like, oh, Google Jameson, just see if there's any more Jamesons in the database. And then there was another. It turned up in my youth system, and I was like looking at him, and I was like, and it says, "Oh, favorite personnel, Tony Jameson, relationship, father," and I was like. I mean, he's not very good, I must admit, right? But you've got to play the kid anyway.
Gotta be proud of him.
He's currently he's the youngest ever player to play for Crystal Palace and the youngest ever Crystal Palace goal scorer. So, you know, and he's followed us around. He went to Palace. I didn't take him to Celtic, but he went to TNS. He was amazing there. Pulled him in at Leeds, and then we now stuck him out on loan back in Stanley because I think that's probably about his level, sadly. But
no hard feelings. Maybe he can line up alongside his dad on the touchline one day. You know,
one day.
Alex Bruce, Steve Bruce thing. Maybe a bit more. You've already had more success than Steve Bruce, so you know it's so thankfully for that, you're going to get that British Steel Challenge done. The last thing I'd say about FM is, has it changed the lens? Because like you've been involved with it for so long, like we all have, but you like obviously went into sort of your profession. Does it change the lens in which you view football in real life? Because I mean, all of us who have been into FM and got an affinity for a real player that pulled from the back pits of wherever, like it's that Leonardo DiCaprio gift that, and you click and you point at the telly when you see them come on for someone, you're like, oh my god, I had him, and you want them to do well. Does that happen with you? Do you find yourself sort of changing your views on things because of the game?
100%. Now, what's interesting is I'm kind of like, I don't watch as much sort of like top flight footballers I maybe used to over the past sort of 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, or whatever. Maybe that's part of my age. Maybe that's because with kids and stuff. Like I'm not seeing like, you know, Saturday and Sunday on the telly is no longer like watching the football. It's now like having to watch Blippy, you know, that sort of thing. Like, and he's not massive on it, to be honest.
He's not big on it. No.
Trying to see what Mr. Tumble's up to. He's having none of that either. So, so watching like sort of people like, and I played during the pandemic. I took Kaiserslautern in the third division of the Bundesliga, took them to the Bundesliga 2, and there was a lad in there called Isaac Liadji who was wanted by like Inter and Paris Saint-Germain and Juventus, and I was like, I'll have a little look, see if I can get him on a free. And I'm like, oh, this kid's amazing. And I hadn't realized that this kid was actually meant to be amazing in real life, right? So I was telling him, mate, I was like, I've signed this kid. And he's like, oh yeah, he's meant to be all right. And then of course he rocks up at Sunderland last season, doesn't he? Like Liadji rocks up at Sunderland. I'm like, Sunderland have signed Liadji, and now he's been shipped off. So I'm like, all right, okay, maybe
it wasn't that
it's
good.
Not quite.
The FM care strikes again.
Exactly, yeah. So
all this talk is making me want to play it so badly, but like you said, it's a part-time job in itself now, because you need to learn where everything is. You used to have your own little tricks, and there is still the filters and everything you can put on it, but like some of the new features, and I'm not saying they've too many cooks or anything, because it's getting just more and more not like real life, but maybe I guess sort of like real life. And you have to deal with some boring admin aspects, and it just gets a bit more, it's a bit harder to get into. But once you get that flow going, once you've got your first team settled in like a League Two, there's nothing like it. So I feel like I might have to dip my toe, you know. Maybe this is going to cause me to relapse without trying to trivialize that word. I
mean, if you do, I completely sympathise. Like, and come for some sort of assistance, and we'll try and heal you. But there is definitely easy ways into it. Like you can delegate a load of stuff now. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there to learn. So but yeah, if you do end up back there, then you'll be welcome with open arms.
Oh, brilliant. Well, we do have one of the guys, Scott. He does do a bit of Football Manager stuff, and I think watch this space. He's going to do some more Newcastle-based saves. But we're here to talk about football as well. The actual one, the one played in the real world. Yeah, as much as those two doth, overlap sometimes. First and foremost, Tony, you're from Washington. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah,
and again, you say in your special about how you didn't want to lose half your mates by going black and white or red and white. You decided to just choose Aston Villa and lose all your mates.
Yeah, pretty much.
how did that happen? Was it from a young age? Did you just get an affinity with, the sticker book or something? So
I'll be honest, I'm on the wrong podcast here. I was raised on the Fulham end at Sunderland, so
can't all be perfect.
Yeah, so that was the thing. So predominantly, I am red and white, I guess, if I have a northeast allegiance. But yeah, Villa just sort of just jumped out at me for some reason. Like I think they'd just been promoted back. So I'm 43. So when I was picking my team, I was about 7 or 8 or whatever. Like Villa had just come back into the old Division 1. So they'd actually been out of Division 2 at the time. And they had players like sort of Gordon Cowans coming through. And obviously Nigel Spink had been there or thereabouts. And then like David Platt. And I don't know, like just Villa Park is like one of those like sort of iconic stadiums. You look at it, a bit like Sampdoria. When you see the Sampdoria stadium, you look at it and you're like, oh, that's a stadium. Like, and it never ages. Like, it just, there's something about it that just resonated. Like whether it was, the color schemes and stuff, maybe played a part of it. It just looked different to everything else. And I was like, yeah, all right, let's have a go with that. They're not particularly successful. Like at the time, they weren't particularly successful. I didn't realize they were former European Cup winners at that point. I'm 7 or 8. What do I know?
Yeah.
But then I do a bit of digging, and I'm like, actually, yeah, okay, right. I think I've done it right here. And then weirdly, it turns out there was like another family in my street in Washington growing up who'd also picked Villa, and they were sort of like in and around my age. And years later, like I move away. So I lived down south for a wee bit. I got tickets for Villa Newcastle to come back up, right? And I'm on the phone to Villa, sort of going like, oh, look, right, get the tickets all booked up, fine. Turn up at my mum's. I'm like, right, where's my ticket for the match? She's like, it hasn't come. I'm like, it's not come. And I'm like on the phone to the club going like, where's my ticket at? And they're like, oh, it's been delivered. And when you have like half a brainwave, you're like, I'm just going to knock on the lad down the street just to see, right? And I knock on his house, and I've not seen the lad for like 20 years or whatever. I knock on the door, and his mum answers, and she was like, is this your ticket for the match by any chance? I was just like, yeah.
Wow.
So
that is some luck, that like.
So I guess, yeah, the chance of there being 2 Villa fans in the same street in Washington was just like far too much for the club to comprehend. So,
but fair play, you stuck with it. I mean, I know there's plenty of. I mean, this is a total wild like turn right off the conversation. I was reading Mark Wood, the cricketer's book, the other day, and like he does all this thing where he kicks the ball at the stumps. He'll say Shearer or Asprilla, and I've always thought, oh, Mint, he's a mag as well. He was a Newcastle supporter, but he says in his book, he said I'm a Wimbledon supporter. Like I've supported Wimbledon my entire life, and he said it's because the sticker book. Like I saw it and I just fell in love with the shirt, and then ever since then I've now support AFC Wimbledon, and you know I want to see the local clubs do well, but they're my team and I've never changed. And you know you have to sort of respect that. A lot of people will be saying you need to be supporting that team, your local team, but you know that's what football's about, and it just fall in love with the club. But you know, just a shame in your sense it was the wrong one, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it depends upon which club you're on about there. So it could have been
either. I mean, have you lost many friends because of that in real life?
I don't think I had many to start off with. That's why I became a comedian. Come on, let's, you know.
Fair enough. I mean, before we get into Villa, I mean, have you ever seen this sort of fake rivalry? I would call it on Twitter. A certain
Nonsense, right?
Certain type of Newcastle fan, certain type of Villa fan. Probably perpetuated by that awful day in 2008, 2009, when we got relegated under Shearer and the swap on the time banners. But we've never let that go. Then Villa fans have always sort of stuck the boot. Not all of them, but then all of a sudden with social media, it's like this just weird fake rivalry that I don't believe in. I know other Villa fans I've spoken to don't believe in it, but then there's this just I think it's been perpetuated by just throwing stuff at each other on Twitter all the time.
Oh man, it's ridiculous. So I was at that game, believe it or not. Like I was actually at that match, and we drove down. So again, like I was back up in the northeast at the time, so we drove down. Quite a few of us, things about maybe 12 of us or something, drove from the northeast to the game, parked all up and that, and. Yeah, all right. You know, the game itself was terrible. It was decided by an own goal. It was one of those things, you know? Yeah, fine, there's a banner hanging up. That's football fans. As a comedian, it's really difficult because like football banter is like really crap. That's the problem.
Like sub on the time is pretty naff,
my level for humor is like there, and then the internet is like all the way down here, right? So like literally, like I mean, behind me, I've had people refer this as the Tottenham trophy cabinet. That's the level of humor you get from the majority of football fans. Like if we use that as a like, oh great, like well done for that, right? Like so this banner thing, this gets blown way out of proportion. You know, tensions are up. You know, club's been relegated. It's not one of those ones where they were bottom of the league all season and it was inevitable. It was just one of those things where it sort of slip, and that was the game that did it, right? Obviously, you know. Some fans take that a bit personally because it's football and people take football too seriously. And you're right. I don't think there's a rivalry, but the weird thing is whenever there's a game now, it's horrible. You can just feel it, that there's just something like there's just a small percentage that just make this atmosphere that's just like, because I remember, I think when you came back up, I think I was at the Fringe and you beat us 6-0, I think it was. And like Andy Carroll just like had the game of his life, and it was, and like the amount of messages I got from Newcastle fans who are my mates go rah, and I'm like, so big deal, like, but oh man, I'm glad you're thinking there as well. Like, there's just nothing there, but some people are just desperate for something, aren't they?
Yeah, and these days now, the comparisons are always getting made in terms of who's bought the better players, and we'll get onto the signings that Villa have made, because they have made good signings. I think Newcastle United have made good signings, but and I guess we'll get into Villa now. I mean, the first half of last season, we were almost living in a 10-year-old Championship manager save, and the fact that Steven Gerrard was Aston Villa's manager. It was the stuff you would have seen about 10 years ago on the game. And things did not go too well, even though a lot of people thought it was a good appointment. But we won't talk about that. Let's talk about Unai Emery and the revelation he's had since coming in. I mean, what a job.
I mean, I will say I was incredibly vocal about Steven Gerrard turning up in the first place. And I feel like I was one of the only people in the planet who was saying, this is a ridiculous idea. This is a stupid decision. This is going to go really, really badly. And I had Rangers fans, of course, they weren't particularly happy with what I was saying about that. They were like, but he's been unbeaten. He's won the league. And I'm like, he's won one cup out of a potential 9. Like, that's not great.
Run in Europe,
like, granted, he's been unbeaten. You can't take that away. That's, in fact, that's amazing, right? However, it was the COVID season when there was no fans, right? So sometimes, you know, clubs, if you're 0-0 at 20 minutes, the fans get on your back. He didn't have that pressure, right? So one trophy out of 9. I was like, right, it ain't going to work, right? It ain't going to work. Turns up and I'm like, oh, you know, because he's going to bring players like Coutinho in. And again, some football fans going, but Coutinho's amazing. Coutinho's brilliant. I'm like, he's not. He's the wrong player for a club who is currently in a relegation battle. You don't bring a player like that in. And we were in a relegation battle, even at the start of the season, because you could see from the back end of the season before, it just wasn't working. So bringing a Coutinho in is not there. You want a player who's going to roll their sleeves up and tackle a bit and rough things out. So there was just these square pegs, round holes, never going to work. And then he comes out going, you can't implement a passing style at Villa. It's going to take too long. And it's like, I don't think it is. So anyway, long story short, he goes, right? I have a lovely time. I have a party. I'm sort of sitting there going, you can all say sorry now, right? And I know I was right, so thank you, okay? And then I'm thinking, right, who are we going to get next? And my head's going, it's going to be Sean Dyche, it's going to be Big Sam, it's going to be Tony Pulis, and I'm going to be fine with them because they're the managers that we deserve at this point, okay? Dyche, I was all for Dyche. I was like, right, we're in a relegation battle, get him in, he's going to grind it out. Then Unai Emery's name comes out. And I'm like, there's no way Unai Emery is going to come to Villa. Don't be so stupid. And then there he is on the pitch. And I'm like, what? How have we convinced one of the best managers in Europe to come to Villa? Mm-hmm. He's just won the 4 billionth Europa League with Villarreal, right? He's currently battling about in the Champions League spots. And then he's like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I'll come back to the Premier League because the last time I was here, I managed Arsenal, who, you know, are quite good.
Yeah.
And I'm like, right, okay, fine. This is going to be interesting. And then he rocks up and he has this passing style that apparently we can't play, but we can play it.
And defensive organisation as well. I think that's one of the key things. Yeah. He seems a very, like our manager, he's very meticulous. He's a hard working manager.
Build it from the back, get the confidence back in the players. I mean, Tyrone Mings, yes, he's got a mistake in him, right? Of course he has, but just give that lad an arm around his shoulder and go, come on, you're the leader. Like, organize it. We believe in you. You'll be fine, right? And he does that. And all these players, they're walking 5 and 6 inches taller. And you look at the form table and you keep reading it going, there's only Arsenal have got more points in like 20 games. That don't make sense. Like, because Arsenal are apparently having this incredible season. But this is just Villa. And then all of a sudden, Villa are like sort of knocking on the door with like 4 or 5 games to go going, are they going to sneak in the Champions League by accident? Like, this doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I was getting. Well, there was a chasing pack. I mean, there was not just you. There was the Brighton
was up there,
and then obviously Liverpool went on that tear. But I remember thinking and then looking at the stats and being like, wow, they've got. I can't remember how many points Villa had more than Newcastle since Christmas. But it just was testament to the job he was doing. It was crazy. It was what a turnaround. And then you start thinking that. Going into this season, they've got a full summer under the belt. We've actually, obviously, we met in this summer series thing and drew 3-3. It was a very funny game. But you think of it, a few additions, but now the introduction of conference football, that's what you guys are in, isn't it? The Europa Conference.
Yeah. Right,
which is an opportunity to do maybe what West Ham did, but not have it affect your league form, hopefully.
I think it's one of those things. I don't think you can have both. I think it's one of those ones where you can't really have a European run and a successful league run this year. But from what I'm seeing, in order to look to combat that, I think the recruitment from Villa, which, again, I suppose probably something that's been levelled at Newcastle also in the past before, recruitment tends to be a bit slapdash, really. There seems to be no thought behind it. Sometimes it's just buying names, like, all right, that name, that'll fix that position. That's great, it's a name, but it's not quite the player you want. Sometimes you want a player who's not a name but can just do the job. And then you're looking at the players that Villa are bringing in, and you're sort of sitting there going, these are good players. These are good players that are coming in for, we're not paying over the top for them. Oh, this might actually work. Like, and now I'm like, it's really bizarre to look at this going, I think we're a contender for Europe before a ball's been kicked. That doesn't.
There's a lot of people making noises, like saying that they expect Villa to do great. I mean, we're getting criticism from some levels of like, Newcastle could get scuppered by this Champions League. They're not having to deal with it for a while. They've only signed 3 or 4 players, but I mean, not to talk about Newcastle too much, but you've signed 3 players, and Pau Torres, fantastic player for Villarreal, knows the manager. Diaby, record signing. That's probably for me. I say it's the riskiest one purely because I would have loved Newcastle to sign him. He's a very exciting player going forward, but again, you just don't know how these players are going to adapt to the league. I know it sounds like a real stereotypical trope.
He's either going to be incredible, because it's a bit like Leon Bailey last year as well.
Yeah, I thought that was an amazing signing.
Like on paper, brilliant, but we don't play with wingers, so it was kind of like, why have we signed a winger? Which again goes back to this whole, there was no plan previously, whereas now there is a plan. Like Buendia, again at the time, record signing, 30 million quid, but you've got Coutinho. You can't play 2 10s, like. And then you've got this, and then you put Bailey in there, who you haven't got a wide player. So already with you going, what are you doing? But yeah, I think he could well, Diaby, he could well be the key that unlocks things, like change stuff around. Like maybe Watkins comes out wide as well. Like if he hits form, and I know pre-season he's had a couple of really good games, and it is only pre-season, but if he keeps that going, that's a very, very exciting player. A very exciting player for the league, to be honest.
And I think maybe also in these Conference League games, I mean, there'll be some games where Emery will chop and change, but they are good sort of platforms, with no disrespect to the teams in the competition, to take a player. Maybe if Diaby struggles for the first couple of months, you put him in that and he scores a brace or he gets a goal and an assist, it just lights a fire.
Get the confidence up.
But who's to say? I mean, he might start like a house on fire anyway. But let's talk about one player, Yuri Tillemans, because that's a player that a few Newcastle fans I saw say we should have been all over him. Other Newcastle fans were saying don't want to be anywhere near him. I think it's purely because we've witnessed a Leicester side who we've played some fantastic football under Brendan Rodgers, then some absolutely atrocious football under Brendan Rodgers. We've seen Newcastle have beat them a couple of times, both when they were at the highs and the lows. And one of the things I noticed the most is when Tielemans was playing, when things got difficult, he sort of down tools, started sauntering about, popping off, making some quite easy, pretty passes, but doesn't want to take the game by the scruff of the neck. Now, Emery's a smart manager. Do you think that's a worry at all, or do you think he's done his own work and he's not going to suffer fools, I guess?
I think I can see why we've signed him. I think if you look at the teams that were apparently linked with him at the time, I know there was a lot of talk with Arsenal leading up towards the end of the season, going, he'd fit the Arsenal style. Yourselves obviously mentioned there as well. I think he was free. Is that right? So, I mean, okay, fair enough, whatever his wages are. It's not a massive gamble per se. I think what we've got, I don't think he'll be a starter. I don't think he'll be the starting number 10. I think they're trying to get Buendia to be a bit more sort of consistent. I think he's a good rotation with Buendia. I think the fact we've got 2 really good defensive players behind him, I think McGinn and Douglas Luiz and even Kamara as well, so 3 defensive players. He can be. We've never been in a position where we can have a luxury player. Never been in a position with a luxury player, and that is one of those things that Emery is managing to bring this Villa side to go. It's a squad game. And we might be playing Conference League football. So we might need a Tielemans who rocks up to some Slovenian side and bags 4 goals, and you can rest Jacob Ramsey for that match. Or, maybe you need something like a little unlocked at the last sort of few minutes of a game, and he turns up against Liverpool and he creates something and he's there. You're right. You're not going to put him out to grind out those matches where they're going to be sat deep and expect him to be the guy to put his foot in all the time. But I think there's going to be moments where he'll be used, and I think it's very exciting. Very exciting. Have you seen the body cam footage of him pre-season?
Yeah, that was pretty cool, wasn't it? Like,
makes you motion sick already. And like, okay, that's great. So, yeah, I think he's definitely an option. And again, with hopefully a long season in front, we need options. And we've got a good youth setup, but to get a player who's got a bit of experience as your backup option, that's not too bad. Plus, definitely we can shift out Coutinho.
Well, you might. I mean, you've got that nice little, dare I call it, a pawn shop over in Saudi. Like, you can get some good money for some sort of low appreciating assets. Because I mean, as much as I 100% appreciate that we are owned by these guys, and it's problematic in the sense of the moral quandaries and all that. But that's a conversation for a totally different day, for a totally different time. The way Saudis are affecting football now is players like Coutinho, who had a name, who is still not that old, has played for Barcelona, has played for Bayern Munich. They'll see him and just be like, oh, well, 35 million. We'll give you 35 million for him, surely. And I think if you probably snap their hands off of that, yeah. I mean, especially in this world of FFP and having to contest and making sure that what you've gotten coming in and it spread across the books. Because I did hear some noises from one journalist saying that Aston Villa are risking sort of maybe flirting with, going into
I think so. I think where we are struggling is players like Coutinho are on massive wages. I think Kamara's on a fair bit as well. And again, this goes back to the Gerrard era. I think overspending to get players in to convince them to be part of the club that were in a bad position. Whereas now we're in a better position, and I don't think we're paying as much in reality for those players. Like, I don't think Pau Torres is on 175 grand a week. I don't think Tielemans is on 180 grand a week. Like, I could be wrong, of course, but I don't think they are. But I also don't think that the sponsorship deals that they've got in place at the minute are reflective of a club that are in Europe, because, to be fair, I don't think they were expecting to be there. So they weren't able to negotiate a deal with, and again, a shirt sponsor which has dubious links anyway. But again, that's another conversation for another day.
Yes,
isn't football great?
Yes, it's awesome, isn't it? Well, it's all good. It's all nice. All lovely. It's what we wanted back in.
But yeah, if we can ship a few players out and try and balance the books, I think that'll be a thing. But yeah, I think they're almost a victim of success by spending a bit more, and then they've got into Europe. And I guess, was it someone said a couple of years ago, you have to win the Conference League to make 2 million quid. If not, you make a loss. Like, that's where you are. So
it's crazy, isn't it? But I mean, before we briefly touch on the game at the weekend, what are your expectations then? What would you be happy with as like a sort of the minimum this season?
A minimum this season, or top half? Top half. Like, I'd still take top half. 8th would be, because the thing is, like, the Premier League is really 3 leagues. I suppose we can probably all agree with that. There's the top 4, maybe to 6, if you want to sort of stretch. Put Liverpool, like, they're sort of like in with the quote unquote the top 4. Your Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool, Manchester United, Tottenham, like, and yourselves. There's probably 6, right? Villa kind of scratch around that little area with now your new breeds of like your Brightons and Brentfords, I suppose, technically have done well the last couple of seasons. Then of course you've got essentially everyone else, really, like, and then whoever comes up. I mean, like, and also then the 3rd league you've got Luton, really. So like they're just happy to be here, right? And
I feel like their fans are going to be so sick of these sort of patting on the heads jokes. I hope they get some early results just to sort of.
I think, because again, I've spoken to a few people about this, they've got a massive advantage in the fact that their stadium is unlike any other Premier League ground. Like, it's compact, like, you're right on top of people. Teams aren't going to like playing there. You fancy, again, probably a bit of a football cliche, you fancy European football, your Tielemans, for example, they're not going to enjoy going there in November, are they? This is when you want. Yeah, this is when you want your sort of your players who they're used to playing in like sort of sideways rain, like that sort of thing. And that's going to be the equalizer. And if they can get some points at home, that's going to be their thing, get their points at home. Anything they get on the road is going to be an absolute bonus. So I don't think, my point essentially was that I don't think the bottom half of the Premier League is any better than the top half of the Championship. In fact, I think a lot of the bottom half of the Premier League teams would struggle in the top half of the Championship, really. So if Villa can now compete in that sort of like 2nd league, really, which is just the top half, I suppose, and push towards Europe, and again, maybe historically would sound strange going and battle your Brightons and your Brentfords to get to Europe, then I think that's probably where we're going to be looking at, in and around that top 8, I suppose, really.
I see us sort of being sort of rivals this season, along with your Brighton.
I'm trying to downplay all this media prediction of Champions League. So I'm trying to play that down, but let's not talk about that just yet. Let's just keep that on the down, right?
But going into the game, I'm saying, I feel like we're on as much as the well-documented takeover at Newcastle, but still the hard work that Eddie Howe's put in to pretty much make us an overnight success. It feels like 18 months. It's a short amount of time in football, some shrewd signings and all, and a the cards falling in our favour. A great season from us, a couple of bad seasons from some other teams, and next thing you know, we found ourselves in the Champions League. But then Villa as well, they've been on this 6-month trajectory, which has skyrocketed them to European football, however the level, and they'll look to put it on again this season with the signings that they've done. So I feel like it's good. I think it's one of the mouth-watering ties of the opening weekend next to Chelsea and Liverpool to see what Chelsea do. How do you see it playing out? Do you think it's going to be? I don't see it being a 3-3 like in the summer series, because we were obviously
maybe.
I think we were both experimenting with some stuff there. I think we had a back three which had Paul Dummett in it. God bless him. And Unai Emery, regardless of how many times we got in behind Villa, just kept that high line pretty much on the halfway line. So I don't see that being the same, but do you still feel that it's going to be an entertaining affair?
I think it will be entertaining. I think if you score first, then we've got a lot of work to do. I think if Villa score first, then I think that there's a new belief in Villa that they could lock a game out if needs to be, which I don't think has been there for a few years. I think we would both take a draw quite happily. I think if it was offered to us, would you take a draw? Yeah, take a draw. Like, because you want to kind of be, if we're talking about these teams being up and in and around the same sort of neck of the woods come the end of the season, then ideally you want to take points off those teams. But if it's a draw, it's a good indication of going, this is two fairly decent sides, and it puts a marker out to the rest of the league going, yeah, they're going to be taken seriously,
Yeah, for me, that's it. I mean, unless it's against one of your bigger sides, and that's no disrespect to Villa, because like I'm saying, we're on par.
Your Arsenals, your Liverpools, your Man
Cities. Yeah, I'll take a draw, but I mean, for me, when you're playing teams like Brighton or Villa, I think if we were away from home, I'd be saying I'd take a draw. If at home, it all depends what happens in the game. You offer me a point if we go 1-0 down. Yeah, it's going to be different. However, if we're 1-0 up or whatever, you want to win. And I think with the games Newcastle have coming up, we've got City and Liverpool, the second and third, then Brighton. I mean, again, no disrespect to Brighton and Villa. They're the ones we're going to be looking to try and take maximum points from, as difficult 100%. As it's going to be. But, I mean, I just feel like there's going to be some interesting battles all over the park. You've got Diaby probably starting. We've got the likes of, we've got options in our attack. And now Isak, Harvey Barnes, Anthony Gordon looks reinvigorated over the summer. So I think that will be a very top-heavy game. And as much as we were the joint best defence in the league last season, we struggled to keep clean sheets in the second half of the season. So there's some interesting, narratives there.
As the season progressed as well, there was that period, wasn't it, where you were struggling to score goals as well and struggling to break teams down, which again could be a worry going forward. I know you've brought in players like Tonali who can ping a ball around. But I think that you mentioned Isak there. I think a very interesting battle will be him versus Pau Torres, because obviously they'll know each other from Spain, and I think that's two big, strong lads going at it for the whole match. That's going to be that. You might just want to watch that. Ignore the rest of the game. That's going to be UFC worthy. That's
I'm going to keep an eye on that. But like you said, there's going to be quality littered all over the pitch, and that's what's going to make a good game. But we've kept you longer than I'd hoped, so I really appreciate your time, Tony. So I'm just going to give you a very easy question. What do you think the score is going to be?
2-2.
2-2, Desmond, 2-2. I'm going to try and be optimistic and say, I'm going to say 3-1, and it's not because we're going to win comfortably. I think it's going to be one of those ones where 1-0, 1-1, 2-1, Villa all over us for last 25 minutes, and we score on the break or from a free kick or something. But that's me being super optimistic, and anyone who's ever watched me do this before knows that I'm the biggest pessimist going. But anyway, that's it for this one. Tony, again, thank you so much for your time. If you wanted to let the guys know, what are you up to? Where can we find you and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so most of the time at the minute, we are starting to make a slow return back to comedy. So obviously, you follow me on Twitter. That's at Tony Jameson, or X as it's called now. You have to follow me on X. At Tony Jameson, that's for any sort of like comedy stuff, which we'll post out there. Twitch is where I'm mainly hanging out these days to replace comedy. So that's twitch.tv/Tony Jameson FM. That's where we do the British Steel Challenge. That's where we get a lot of Football Manager content on there. So it's me chatting away, eating a load of trifles as well. That seems to be my thing. Somehow we ended up eating a trifle on stream one night. I was having my tea, and that's become the thing now. So there's lots of trifle-based stuff and a lot of Football Manager. And then, of course, the FM show, which is a podcast, which you can get at all the places you get podcasts and YouTube as well. So, but yeah, no, thank you very, very much for having me. I really enjoyed it. So It's brilliant.
Well, hopefully we'll have you on again very soon. But best of luck for the rest of the season, but maybe not starting on Saturday. Anyway, everyone else, thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, please like, share, subscribe. If you're not new to the channel and you haven't liked this video, what you do and go down there to literally a tiny little scroll down, press the like button, comment on this, just interact with us, have some fun. I hope we enjoy this new season, and we've got a lot of good stuff coming on this channel for you. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.